video will show the disassembly and reassembly of this tactical target Ruger 1022. The first thing we need to do is remove the stock. This is accomplished by removing one screw. It's to be noted that the firing pin has already been removed from this rifle so as to speed up the making of this video. The next thing we do after removing the stock is remove the trigger group. This is accomplished by removing 3 pins. The first pin that's removed is known as the buffer pin. It's the biggest of the 3 and located towards the top of the receiver. The 2 other pins are the exact same size and come out fairly easily for the most part, but sometimes will require that you tap them with a punch and a hammer. As I'm doing here, I'm using a nylon hammer. I'm now showing you where the firing pin is normally located. That entire area was gummed up with Loctite previously, and the firing pin would not move at all. And you can see now that the area has been cleaned out, that the firing pin slides freely. Okay, I'm now showing you where the firing pin spring goes in. It goes into the groove where the firing pin goes in, and then you can slide it back and forth, and there's a deeper channel within that groove that holds the firing pin in place on one end. The firing pin then hooks on the end of the spring. When the trigger is pulled, the firing pin normally gets hit, pushing the firing pin forward, and then the spring pulls it back. When we had the problem initially, the firing pin was not moving at all. The firing pin gets held in via a rolled pin. You'll see me tapping that in 1 minute. The firing pin sometimes can be a little bit sticky going in, and you have to, hit it for a fair while. Again, you don't want to overdo it, so a bunch of light taps and it eventually should slide in. In this clip, I'm now showing you that the firing pin is now functioning properly, and you can see that as I push on the end, the firing pin moves forward. However, the spring returns it back to the proper position. Okay, now this is the trickiest part, and that's replacing the bolt. The hard part about it is that you have to compress the bolt spring and then push the bolt down on top of it so that the bolt handle sits in the groove of the bolt. I normally try to get it compressed outside of the receiver and then try to slide the whole thing into the receiver, because it can be a little bit tricky to do at times. Okay, so I'm now putting in the receiver, and I'm using oops, I have some trouble there. So I'm getting it, as I said earlier, compressed outside the rifle a little bit, and now using both hands to compress it and hold it in place with one hand, and then I take the bolt with the back end being lower than the front end, and then trying to force the front end under the lip. And again, the first time you do it, it's quite difficult, but you eventually get the hang of it, and I get the first shot here. I'm cycling the bolt back and forth just to show you that it works. So now all we have to do is replace the trigger group. There's 3 pins that hold in the trigger group. You might remember that from before. The first pin being the buffer pin. Before we put the trigger group in, you can see that I'm showing a lever, for lack of a better name, that has to be pushed into a slot. If you have that set up wrong, the rifle won't work correctly. I initially put the wrong pin in for the buffer pin. The buffer pin is larger than the other 2. And I figure that out in 1 minute here. Again, it should be clearly noted that I am not a gunsmith and actually fairly new at firearms. So if I can do this, anybody can. Okay, so I have the buffer pin in. I have this first trigger group pin in, and then the second trigger group pin's a little bit stiff, so I use a pin punch and a hammer again just to get it to go in the rest of the way. A couple more taps and it should be in. Now all we have left to do is to put the stock back on the rifle, and as you remember before, there's only one screw that holds the entire thing in. You sometimes have to ensure that the safety is in the middle position, otherwise it won't clear both edges of the stock. But other than that, it's a fairly simple operation. See me working it back and forth and tightening the spring down. Then after all that's done, all there's left to do is test the firearm. There, so it's
Okay, initial test fire of the Ruger 1022 that was repaired. Looks like it works.
Okay, this group of shots was taken at 50 yards. I normally don't shoot at 50 yards, but I had to zero in the scope to do this test. There was also a 5 to 10 mile an hour wind blowing that day. Now, 10 miles an hour of wind can blow a shot off by 4 inches at 100 yards, so I really wanted to minimize what the wind was doing. Of course, if the wind's continuous, you can compensate for that, but again, the wind was gusting. As you can see, it's a pretty good group. The first 2 shots were taken, and then I made a scope adjustment, and then the final 4 shots were taken. The question begs to be asked, why don't we shoot cheap bulk ammo all the time if it can give this sort of result? Well, first of all, bulk ammo might not shoot very well in some guns. It did very well in this particular gun. The other big thing is this is only a group of 6 shots. If you were to say shoot 5 or 10 groups of 5 shots, you would find that you would regularly have flyers, and those flyers would be extreme. And if you calculated, the group size you were getting, your group size really wouldn't be that good. So I had a lucky group here that it happened to the rounds that I randomly selected happened to be very consistent, and we got a good group. But overall, I think the owner of the rifle will be very happy with this performance. I'm going to put my email address at the bottom if anybody has any 1022 questions. It is one firearm that I am very familiar with now, and also familiar with a variety of ammo that can be fired from this particular rifle. And personally, I only shoot match ammo myself. But anyways, have a nice day, and thanks for watching the video.